So this is a fun design that's going to add some interesting texture to your next quilt project. Hey everybody, I'm Tom the ColourBlind Quilter and you're watching This Is How You Quilt It, where we are on design number 12, which I'm calling X's. I think this is a fun little design that adds some interesting texture to a quilt. It feels very modern and you know, it does suit squares very nicely, but I actually think this looks very nice on a rectangular quilt. And it adds a really interesting movement through the quilt. But there's no faff, there's no problems. It's very simple to do, it just takes a little bit of planning to make sure that you've got the right number of lines. And the rest is easy peasy. So on the difficulty rating, I think this is a 3, maybe 2.5 out of 5. Yeah, let's call it 3 out of 5. It's not that difficult to sew, just you need to be confident at sewing straight lines. So let's give it a 3 out of 5. On the snuggle rating, I think this is fairly soft. And they're not too dense, so I think a 2 out of 5. No, let's give it a 3 out of 5. It's middle of the road, 3 out of 5. Let's get straight to the preparation steps and show you what we need to do. So the first thing that we need to do for this design is mark a cross from corner to corner. If you have a 45-degree line on your ruler, you can use that. You don't need to use it though, okay? But it can be helpful. So the 45-degree line of this ruler is running down the edge of my block. It's intersecting with the corner and it's intersecting with the bottom corner. I'm going to place weight on the ruler, pressing down so that the ruler does not shift. I use a Clover white marking pen with a fine tip. I like to start in the middle when I'm drawing, especially on corners, because the fabric just wants to do this, wants to bunch up as that pen draws down the fabric. So if you start in the middle and work out towards the corners, it's much better at stopping it bunch up. So I'm going to put pressure, pressing down, start somewhere in the middle, work my way up to that corner, adjusting my hand if necessary to really keep that sharp. And then just running down, shifting my hand down, walking it down like a crab. Maybe a little bit more just to make sure that that corner does not shift, because let me tell you, that corner wants to shift. And there's my line. Now let me show you the hack. If you don't have a long enough ruler, for the second line you would just repeat that, lining up the 45 if you have one, you don't need to, or just lining up your ruler corner to corner and boom. If you don't have a big enough ruler, you can take a smaller ruler. So this is only 12 inches long versus that one which was 24, and you can line up the 45-degree again. This time it is important because you need to keep this side of the ruler going in the right direction, otherwise you might end up like drawing off here and it's not going to be right. Another tip, and this applies to whatever ruler you're using, this line that you can see here, line it up with the line on your ruler. That will keep it straight. So again, start somewhere in the middle, work your way out towards that corner. Oh, there we go. And then draw down, give yourself a couple of inches of ruler left, slide it down. I've moved my pen just to show you this, but ideally if you can do it without moving your pen. I'm going to slide my ruler down until I'm certain that I'm off the corner, which I am, right off the corner. Let me just move the block up. Okay, so this is right on the corner. I've got nothing over here to help me, guide me, so I'm relying on two things. I'm relying on making sure that the line that's drawn already is lining up the edge, and shifted. And then I'm using this line here to keep me right. So this actually will keep the angle right, whether you're aware of it or not. Pressure, again starting away from the edge, working my way down towards it, and really keeping that edge in place. Now, easy peasy for the rest of it. And you can use whatever size ruler you want. I'm going to stick with this one. I'm going to find the 5-inch line and I'm going to place it on that center cross, okay? This is exactly the exact middle of the block, so it's 5 inches in from each side. So I'm going to take a 5-inch line and I'm going to place it here. I've got this lining up and the bottom lining up. We're going to put a little check at the 4, 3, 2, and the 1, and then down here a little check at the 6, at the 7, at the 8, and at the 9. Okay, so they will start to show up in a minute, but I've basically put little dots. Flip it 90 degrees and repeat. I like to line mine up with an edge. It doesn't make a difference how you line it up here. It's just to get straight edge, but on camera with my lighting, it's much easier for me to see my lines are matching when I'm doing it like this. So do it however way you prefer, but I'm just making sure that we are lined up, and just repeat. The 5, the 4, 3, 2, and then the 6, the 7, the 8, and 9. Okay, so you've got drawn lines corner to corner, and then you've got dots going each way. Next, we'll do this in sections. Take your ruler, find your first dot, and line it up. So you would think that the spacing is going to be 1 inch from here to here, but it's not. It's only 3/4 of an inch. So with my 3/4 line on this line and my ruler on the dot, I'm going to draw from the dot to the edge. And we're going to do all the same direction at the same time to save time. Again, lining up on the dot. 3/4 line is on the line that I just highlighted. The 1.5 inch line is on the first line. You want a little extra check here to keep you straight. Line up this line with the line that goes across that way. These are great tips for keeping your line straight. Find your point again. I've lost mine. There, it's there. And draw to the edge. And then we're just going to keep repeating this. There we are. The last one in this direction. Now flip. And the lines here that run this way, we're going to line up with the lines on our ruler to help us get our angles right, okay? So you got to line up this line, this line, this line, and this line. Otherwise, we're going to end up a bit wonky. And then draw your line when you're happy. Depending on where your ruler is, you might also have a 45-degree line that you can use to line up on the edge here. If that's too confusing for you, just do the same thing as you did before, but just work this way. So 3/4 line, 1.5 inch line, all lining up. Just draw onto the edge and just repeat that. Good check for you as well. You can find lines that line up, help keep you straight. You want to do whatever you can to try and keep your lines straight, and that's even more crucial when we're drawing these on big quilts. So you can see they're like chunks. And then you just got to repeat that 3 more times. So I'm just going to start here. I'm going to speed this up for you. Take your time, and away we go. If you make a mistake, you can see that the spacing between here and here, I missed the dot. That's okay. We just can put little marks to say that that's wrong, and then we can come back and we can fix that and just redraw the lines. Or you can just erase the lines if you prefer. Okay, and so I know not to sew this line, and I will erase it when we're finished. And there we have it. Now if you want a quick check of all your points, you can take your ruler and you can just place it along all the dots and check that your lines are intersecting along the ruler. So that's looking good. And that's looking good as well. This one here is just a little thick. That's okay. It's just the pencil line's a bit smudged, but it does line up. So there we go. Not too bad to prep. Just make sure you get this initial line right and then get your spacing, and then it's dead simple. So those were the prep steps, and as you saw, I had a whoopsie-daisy moment. I did consider editing that out, but I feel that it's good to show you these things so you can see what happens if something goes wrong and then how you can fix it. So don't worry about it if you make a mistake. Just keep going. So now let's look at the sewing for this, and it really is just straight lines, so it's dead simple. Okay, so we're going to start first in a corner, and we're going to sew corner to corner. Line up the needle with the corner, and we're going to stitch straight down through the middle of the block all the way to the next corner. As you get to this, slow down, use your fingers to stabilize the corner of the fabric, and then sew off the edge and cut your thread. Now a little bit set up on my sewing machine, I am using a straight stitch plate, which means there's only one hole. I am using a walking foot. I am using a 50 weight white Gutermann cotton thread, and my stitch length is set to 2.5. I'm wearing rubber fingertip gloves, quilting gloves, to help me manipulate. I don't use a securing function on my sewing machine. I just sew on and off the edges. I like to do a zigzag stitch around these, and that secures all those threads. But if you like to use a start and stop, absolutely not a problem. So just repeat what you just did. Line up on the corner and then sew down that line. If your sewing machine is trying to chew up that corner, which some sewing machines will, get yourself just a little scrap of fabric, sew that first, and then sew your block. But we didn't need that here. Take your time as you get to the middle so that the lines are nice and straight. You see me as well, I use my hands in a triangle position when sewing straight lines, and as I feed through the sewing machine, as I get my fingers touching or halfway through the walking foot, I will then readjust, stop and readjust, or sometimes readjust as I'm sewing. When I get to the edge, I just like to put my fingertips here, just either side, being careful not to get caught under the walking foot. And that just helps us stop this doing that as the machine pulls it through. And then sew off the edge nice and slow. Cut your threads. Now we're going to start sewing these next triangles. I'm going to start with this line here, the longest line. So you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to line up on the edge, line up on that line, and you're going to sew down until you reach the point where until you reach this point here, and then we're going to pivot. So, coming towards where I need to be, take my time slowing down. We don't want to overshoot this. We want to try and get a nice precise corner. So take a stitch at a time. One more. Come on, machine. One more stitch. There we go. And then if you do have this facility for the foot hops as you stop sewing, that's really helpful when you have to move your things about because it saves you having to lift. If you don't have that, don't worry. Also, I like to stop with my needle down because that makes it easier to turn the fabric without losing my spot. And then we're just sewing down the line. And then off the edge and cut threads. There we are, nice sharp points. And that's really important, we want sharp points, okay? And then you're just going to repeat that for each of these lines, slowing down as you come to the pivot point, taking it a stitch at a time, turning, pivoting, lining back up, and sewing down your line. It is essentially just sewing straight lines. So you just have to pivot and you get to a certain point. And it goes so quickly. And is a dawdle to sew. This is fun to sew. So when it comes to sewing, what you find a lot of the times people watch the needle, making sure that it's hitting the line, but actually by the time the needle is puncturing the fabric, it's too late. So you actually want to be looking a little bit ahead, like maybe here, so that you can make adjustments to your line as you need to. If I watch my needle, it's way too late for me to adjust the position. So that was one side, and you can see nice sharp points. So we just need to repeat that for each of the sides. So it's time for a cheeky time lapse. You might notice there that thread tail was getting pulled into the stitches. I don't worry about that either. I just move it out the way or pluck it out later. But I can see that my bobbin has just run out. So it's time to change the bobbin. I'm going to be lazy. I don't want to have to bury threads. So I'm just going to pick these stitches out because there's not that many of them. And they come out fairly easy. There we go. So I'll just start that line again with a fresh bobbin. Okay, so I have just wound a fresh bobbin and put it in the machine and then rethreaded it. Now I could just go straight back to this and sew, but I like to just get a quick sample so that you can see this is a little scrap sample that I use to check tensions of threads and things like that. And I just like to sew a line to make sure that everything is okay with the rethreading, because sometimes things don't catch, or sometimes the bobbin is not correctly wound. So I just sew myself a little line, check for any problems. So this top stitch looks lovely, bottom stitch looks okay as well, no problems with that, tension's good. Okay, so then we can continue sewing. And as you saw, I just picked that out because it was only like, what, 1.5 inches of stitches. If that happened in the middle of a long seam on my quilt, I would, of course, pull out a few stitches to give me a long thread tail, bury the stitches, make a knot, bury the stitches, no, make a knot, bury the thread, and then continue sewing and do the same, leaving myself a long tail when I was starting the new stitches so that I could then knot and bury that as well. I hate when my thread runs out or breaks in the middle of a long stitch. It's so frustrating to have to do that and fix it. I did actually, I'm quite bad that I would unpick, you know, 30 inches of stitches just not to have to knot and bury my threads, which is really bad. It's really lazy. Well, it's not lazy, I suppose it's extra work, but it's lazy in a sense. Anywho, that took no time at all to sew. It was dead easy, looks great, and I think that it's a lovely design for a square quilt. It's also a great design for a rectangular quilt. It would work very nicely as well. So there we have it, X's. See, simple, easy peasy, straight lines, doesn't take you any time at all. Probably takes you more time to turn your sewing machine on. Let's think about a few things to watch out for though with this design. Now, I think that when it comes to this design, you want to make sure you do planning for your line, because this little edge bit here, you want that to be a fairly decent size. You don't want it to just be a tiny little point on the quilt. So you just need to do some planning of how far apart you're going to put these lines so that you end up with a decent line there. But when you're planning how far apart to put your lines, make sure you check how far you can quilt your batting so that you don't go beyond that, because then things will shift and move and you might end up with bagging in your quilt. You don't really want that. If you did this with a serpentine stitch, so the wavy stitch, or a zigzag stitch, it would look amazing. Okay, amazing. And I did actually toy with making this design using those stitches, but I thought we would just keep this simple for now. If you're just really fancy, the space between these lines here would lend itself to some more quilting, particularly if these lines were like, you know, 6-7 inches apart. You could very easily do a zigzag in that space. You could do a serpentine stitch. Ooh, that would be nice. Or wavy lines. If you're good at free motion quilting, you could do bubbles or pebbles as they call them, or you could do feathers in between those lines if you really want to take this and make it really special. But for the purposes of this video, we are sticking to walking foot design. So I would be doing maybe zigzags or some of the decorative stitches that are on my sewing machine to add something, a little je ne sais quoi in the middle of those lines. But you don't have to, you can just keep it as it is and it will still look amazing. Now let's look at the really fun stuff. Let's take this design and show you what it looks like on some example quilts. Okay, so our first example quilt is my favorite modern circle pattern. I mentioned during the opening of the video that this is a modern feeling quilt design, so I felt that this suits this pattern very nicely. And so this looks very nice. I love how this gives a kind of feeling of movement into the center of the quilt, which makes me think this would actually be a great design as well if you had a big focal point in the center of a quilt that you wanted to draw attention to. But I love this, and I love how it creates some of these patterns. So if you can see my mouse on screen, it creates this kind of little star in the middle, which looks great. And then I love how it creates like these shapes. So it makes me think a little bit like city blocks or things like that. But I love how everything points into the center, and I love the way they intersect through the circles. So I think it's very modern. I think it works very nicely for a modern quilt. So next up is my favorite carpenter star. Now this pattern works so well with this design. It's almost like the design was made for this pattern. And I love how this intersects through the quilt. It feels like it highlights the piecing. So rather than the first design where it was kind of all over the piecing, this feels like it highlights the piecing and works with it. So it creates these nice chevrons cuts up all the outside pieces of the star and it creates a beautiful texture through the background and the border. I love just how this looks. I think it looks great. And again, you know, Carpenter Star is quite traditional pattern, and this is a modern quilt pattern on top of it, and the two combine together to complement each other very nicely. So another one on the list to make. Maybe what I need to do is I need to figure out how to make a 12-inch Carpenter Star and then make a quilt out of Carpenter Stars and design and quilt each one with these different designs. Mind you, a 12-inch Carpenter Star would be very difficult. Those HSTs would be tiny. Anyway, next one. Now, this is our favorite curved piecing pattern, and I wanted to show you again how this can work as an all over but can also complement as well. Now, first off, I really struggled to get a color of line that works, that contrasts enough so you can actually see the lines shine through. So I've tried to pick pieces to kind of highlight either where two blocks meet or in the middle of a background, and I kind of feel like it works. I feel like it could be better. I think I could spend quite a lot of time getting this right. But I think as a kind of first, just quick impression, it does work. And it works very nicely. The lines are not quite evenly spaced though because of the way that the blocks are laid out. And so this kind of gives you the idea of what it might look like if some lines were closer together and some lines were further apart. So which would create a slightly different feel. But I do think that this works with the quilt, but with the caveat that it needs some tweaking to really get these lines to place properly and make sure that they really are popping in the right places. This did take quite a lot of time. It might not look like it, but this did take me about 25 minutes to get to this level. And I can already see bits and pieces that I would fix if I was really going to do this on a quilt. So I think that this works and I think it'll look great, but just take your time if you were going to do this and plan it out so that those lines really pop. And then finally, I thought we would play a little bit and just show you what can happen if you kind of mix up and play with this design. So we have a simple single Irish chain here. What I wanted to do was to show you what would happen if, rather than having the entire design, just to take like one section of the design and use it through the quilt. Love how this turned out for quite a few reasons. The kind of Irish chain has the diagonal movement, you know, the lines that are created from these 9 patches that run across the quilt. I feel like adding these quilting lines is really accented and creates this kind of movement. I mentioned before with this design that it kind of makes me think of the Grand Prix flag, you know, the racing flag. Kind of makes me think of like that. So when you add this design through it with everything moving, it kind of adds more to that feel. Again, a very traditional quilt pattern, you know, 9 patch, single Irish chain, and then adding this very kind of modern feeling quilt on top creates a very nice fusion of traditional and modern, I think. I love the movement that it creates. This would equally have worked going down the quilt or up the quilt or to the other side. And I really, really enjoy this. You could go a little denser with the lines if you like. You could double up on the lines as well, do like 2 lines, maybe half an inch apart down the middle. That would look amazing as well. But I really like how this works. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to show you the versatility of these designs. You know, just because the design has, you know, 4 sections, you can take one section, you can do an amazing job on a quilt with it, or you can take 2 sections and you can overlap them slightly and do different things. So I just wanted to show you that it's easy to take the design and kind of turn it into something slightly different, just with a little bit of tweaking or with the placement of the lines and how you adjust them to fit over your quilt. So, you know, the possibilities are endless. And I'm making a single Irish chain quilt as part of a video project that's coming up soon, and so I am going to be quilting it using this design because I think it looks great. So those are my example quilts, just something a little bit different to finish with there, just to show you the versatility. So hopefully you find these helpful and inspirational and enjoyed them. So that was it. That was our X's. And I think it's really quick and simple to sew. So I'm going to be using this in my getting my soju back process so that I can get my quilts finished quickly. And if you're interested in watching that video, I'll put a link in the description below. In our next video, video number 13, which is unlucky for some, we are doing the zigzag crosshatch. Oh, and this is one of my favorites. I know I say that every time, everyone's my favorite, but I really do like the zigzag crosshatch. Now we are making a little flip book out of all of these samples so that when we are quilting and we get to the end of the pattern and it says quilt as desired, we don't need to be filled with dread and panic. We can pick up our book, we can flick through and we can find something that's going to be fast and easy to sew on our projects so we can get them finished, but it still looks great when we're done. And there's also going to be a book that accompanies this video series. So if you're interested in that and want to get notified when it comes out later this year, you can sign up to the pre-orders mailing list. If you're new to this video series, you'll also find a worksheet which has all the information, fabric requirements, and the prep that you need to do to follow along. And I'll leave a link to that in the description with a link to the playlist that has all of the previous videos in it. If you are sewing along, I would love for you to share your progress on Instagram using the hashtag #ThisIsHowYouQuilt. And if you tag me, the ColourBlind Quilter, I will give it a like and I will share it so that other people can see what you've been working on. And then finally, if you found this video helpful, it would really help me out if you could give it a thumbs up. And make sure that you subscribe and you click the bell so you're notified when the next video in this video series comes out. So I hope you had fun with your X's, and I hope you can't wait for the zigzag crosshatch, because I can't. And take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.